Okay, if anybody's unhappy with the recording, I think you'll have to leave. We're going to take a bio break after the presentations, and then we've had quite a few questions in from participants, which we're going to, well, which we've distilled into a subset of questions, which I'll be addressing to the panelists to get their response. During the meeting, we'll have a number of opportunities to address an online poll. And rather interestingly, the online poll will ask the same questions at intervals throughout the 2 hours we have ahead of us, so that we can track the impact we're having from the presentations and from the discussion on the outcome of that poll. And we'll introduce that at the appropriate point. The learning from this event, which is really the objective, to learn as much as we can from our questions and from our presentations, will then be taken forward to shape 2 further activities. One is a series of focus groups in the national park to address the issues of transport here. And there will also be a YouGov survey conducted in the national park to follow up to get further input from members of the public, including both residents and visitors to the Lake District. So what are the research priorities within the National Park Partnerships Plan? I mean, the first one, as you probably have all read within the introductory information you've been supplied with, is how visitors and residents would like to move, how they wish to move to and within the Lake District National Park. Secondly, how we should address congestion, if indeed people believe there is congestion in the national park, and how we should address achieving net zero in the transport system to, from, and within the national park. And finally, the third question is to get better awareness of innovation from our speakers that's going on elsewhere in the country and indeed in the world to improve the way that we travel around the park, to make it more sustainable, more convenient, reduce social exclusion, and many other social benefits that ought to come from changes in transport mode. So who have we got with us today? 4 speakers. First on will be Gillian Annable, who is from Leeds University. Each speaker will perhaps introduce themselves as they start their presentation, followed by James Beresford, who is the Deputy Chair of the Peak District National Park, bringing their experience to the Lake District. James Blake, who is CEO of the Youth Hostel Association, which of course has a significant presence in this national park, and Stephen Joseph, who is a transport advisor, transport policy advisor, and will explain who he advises, I'm sure, when he comes in to play. So without further ado, I think it's worth starting, but perhaps before I do so, it'd be interesting for those of you on the call to know what sort of participation we've got. The original acceptance list included 20 representatives of parish, district, new unitary authorities and county councils in Cumbria surrounding the Lake District, 22 community groups of all shapes and sizes, from particular villages right through to Cumbria-wide or Lake District-wide initiatives, a disappointing in some ways low level of business participation. We've got 8 or 9 businesses joining us this morning, although many others will be involved in businesses as well as having their council roles. And 4 of those are involved in transport, primarily micro transport, e-bike businesses, and also representation from the haulage industry, which is quite a major part of activities in Cumbria and surrounding the Lake District, and indeed in the Lake District. Obviously, there's a number of individuals. We've got representatives from the Greens, the Labour Party, and the Conservative Party, Cumbria Tourism, National Trust, National England, Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership, and 3 universities, including the University of Cumbria. So at that point, what I'd like to do is to invite Lorraine to put up the first question, I think, before we start the presentation.
Yeah, I'm just about to do that, Steve. So this is a poll, and what you need to do is just choose one. You should be able to just tick on one of the options. So you should now see that poll in the middle of your screen. Is that what people are seeing, Steve?
Not what I'm seeing.
Negative. I'm not seeing a poll. Lorraine, it came up and disappeared.
It's there now, Lorraine.
You know.
Thank you.
Lorraine, we're viewing the poll results shared by the host, not the original question. So each one had 0%, sadly.
Okay.
Should we all close that?
Yeah, we'll give that another. You seeing the questions now?
No.
They've gone again.
Right. I'm very sorry, but I've just relaunched the poll, so give that a try now. See if you can vote on it.
That works, Lorraine. That's fine. So we'll just give people 1 minute to read that and tick the one they wish to, and then we'll move into presentations.
Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody should have had time to do that, and perhaps it would stay there anyhow. So, Gillian, can I invite you, please, Gillian Anable from the University of Leeds, to share your presentation with us over 15 minutes. And I'll start the clock now.
Great, yes, I will do. Okay, I'm just sharing my screen now. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate just being given confirmation when you can see it.
You need to go to full screen, Gillian, now.
Okay.
Gillian, just before you start, I'm going to share the results. So you should all be seeing the results of the poll.
Would you like me to stop sharing?
No, you're fine, because it comes in on top of it.
Okay, great.
People can see that number 3 is the favoured with 43 of 63. So we will come back to that later on in the event. So over to you now, Gillian. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, again, I would just appreciate that confirmation when you can see the full screen, and then I'll get started.
You're sharing your speaker screen at the moment, Gillian.
I am. Oh, right. Okay.
I'm sure it doesn't matter.
I don't think it does, actually, if people don't mind, in the sense that I haven't really got any confidential notes or anything. So I'll get started, so there's no more faffing. All right. Good morning, everyone.
If you just click display settings, you can change the view. If on the top left-hand corner where it says display settings, on the drop down.
I'm not sure where you mean, sorry.
If you can't see it. Okay, no, if where it says display settings, you should be able to just change the view.
Gillian, just carry on. With
okay, I'll just carry on. Right, yeah, sorry. Okay, so I am very pleased to be here. I will give you a warning that my area of research, which I have researched now for many, many years, is investigation of passenger travel and mobility patterns, both in terms of broad trends over time and potential future scenarios, but also at the individual level, what people do, why they do it, how some of what they do can be influenced and changed, etc. And I do all of that in relation to climate change policy, carbon emissions, and what the prospects are for meeting our carbon budget targets. And things are really not looking good. Essentially, we have made no progress. So we are in a situation where we have got to make around 40 years worth of change in the next 10 to 15 years. And that's where I come from. So that's where my grumpiness, if it comes through, which I fear it might come from. So we were asked to think about a scenario or a couple of scenarios in order to address exactly the issues of congestion and carbon targets for the Lake District. And so here's a few principles, and I am going to be sticking at some quite high level principles for what I say, because essentially I feel that if we don't agree on some of these principles, my sense is that there's not a lot of point in having any discussions about individual types of policies, such as some e-bikes here and some road closures there. I think we have to agree on some really hard-hitting principles before we can think about what the package of solutions is beneath those principles. So firstly, as is acknowledged, but I'm not sure then gets acknowledged enough in the discussion, we have to look at getting to the park with as much energy and diligence and effort as we talk about how visitors and residents move around within the park. They are related. They're related because if we don't address how people get to the park, we have virtually no chance of doing what we need to do within the park. So although they're linked, I think we have to make sure that there's as much effort given to each of those types of travel separately. The second principle is that we cannot do any of this without hard-hitting policies which constrain and charge for car use. There is nowhere in the world at any geographical scale that has ever reduced car use without constraining car use. You can look at best practice policies around the world of providing alternatives to the car and see that they have not eaten into car use. That is a fact. There is no getting away from that. It means, as the red writing on the bottom of this slide says, that if we are not talking about really controversial things and we are not acknowledging that there will be losers, we cannot have win-win solutions here. Forget it. It's not possible. So if we are not accepting that there will be losers, then we won't be changing anything. There is very little point in talking about what we're going to be talking about unless we acknowledge that there will be losers. And the way that the conversation usually goes is that we start to talk about social exclusion as you know, the big fear and the reasoning why we can't do some of these hard-hitting policies. And my starting point with that is to say that travel to the park and within the park, visiting the park and working and living in the park is already severely socially excluded. It is very expensive as a visitor to come to the Lake District. And it is not the job of the transport policy community to address inequalities in society. And the biggest inequality that we face is the fact that the Lake District will not be there in its current form for future generations. So I'm not suggesting that we need to do things that make the situation less fair. There are ways and means of doing everything that we can do by giving consideration and exclusions if necessary to particularly socially excluded groups. But social exclusion is here now. This is not something we need to use as what is often termed a discourse of denial to not do some of the things that we need to do. And essentially there are only two scenarios. The first scenario is that we severely restrict car use, both the types of cars, the number of cars, and we do that through physical constraints and fiscal constraints. And that is the way in which we achieve the objectives that we're talking about. Or the use of cars will be restricted for us via the economic constraints that are the economic impacts of the deterioration to the Lake District environment, the quality of the visiting experience, and also the extreme weather disruptions that we all are becoming far, far too familiar with. So this trade-off between these two scenarios is right here, right now. These aren't future trade-offs. These aren't future scenarios. These are the only two scenarios, and these are the trade-offs that we're facing now. The issue is that we don't acknowledge this explicitly enough. We don't acknowledge it in our conversations that we're having as experts and as those that influence the policy, and we don't acknowledge this trade-off when we're doing things like focus groups and public engagement events. So we can't have a conversation in the light of what I've just said about how we might close the odd valley or road and turn them into a green lane or a quiet lane, about how we might get some e-bikes used a bit more here and there, about how we might have the piecemeal introduction of some demand responsive services here and there, the prevalence and need for electric charge points and a gradual transition to EVs. We can't do that. We have to do all of those things, but we can't have the conversation about how impactful they might be and in what combination we need all of those things, unless we have agreed the principles that I've set out to start with. So this is about a radical new vision, and it's that vision is not just about the nuts and bolts of the transport system, but it's about the social contract that sits above that vision and about the business models, and thinking about the Lake District as an entity with a business model, a new business model that that it's going to develop and use to implement these changes. So the components of the scenario that to me are not negotiable. And then there's a lot of elements, obviously, that need to be talked about in terms of all kinds of other provision beneath this. But the main component of the scenario is that cars need to not be allowed into the Lake District to the extent that is possible. We need much more serious thought about these gateway entry points. They need to be identified. The locations need to be identified now, and we need to think about the business models that will be used to provide them. So in these gateway sites, there are a whole load of other services that need to be placed there in order for this to work, in terms of people arriving, getting different kinds of cars to switch into. Those cars themselves will have facilities, roof racks, cycle racks. There will be places there to pick up shopping, click and collect shopping, and so on. This is a whole new way of accessing the park and being able to bring yourself and the things that you need into the park. But the only way that this is going to happen is if we think about the park as a whole region, a whole network, not in terms of individual areas or roads and so on. And this is the kind of thing that happens in best practice models around the world. Often Zurich is held up as an example of how to do this in terms of regional provision of services, integrated ticketing, pricing, and levels of service that are set out in advance, identifying key corridors, having minimal levels of service for different settlement sizes and types. In terms of cars, cars and camper vans could enter the park, but only if there is charging to go with that, and that charging needs to be a flat rate per day and related to the size of the vehicle, not the emissions of the vehicle, but the size of the vehicle. There's no such thing as a zero emissions vehicle, and much of the environmental impact and the congestion impact in the park is related to the volume of cars. And just to concentrate the mind on that, I don't know what the figure is for the number of vehicles that are in the park or at any one time in the Lake District. But if you take the UK as a whole, there's 33 million vehicles. If you take the fact that vehicles are on average a metre longer than they were in the 1970s, that in itself means 33,000 kilometres extra volume, extra space taken up just by the cars existing without being used. The traffic jams that exist, the car parking pressures that exist as much because of the size of the vehicles as the number of vehicles. And so anything that's being thought about in terms of charging has to be done on the basis of the size of vehicles, not just the carbon footprint of those vehicles, and the two things are related. And electric vehicles that are big are not good cars. They require more space, they require more electricity. That means extra pressure on the grid. It means it's going to take a lot longer for us to green our electricity to provide it for those vehicles. It's going to just push the time at which we have 100% renewable energy into the future. So the signal has to be about the size of the vehicles. And that applies also to how car ownership is dealt with in the park. And that means some targets for which cars can be driven around the park at all by future dates. And parking is, as well as charging, the other intervention that is known to have impact on car use is parking. And we know this. Again, much of this is why I'm frustrated. This is why I'm grumpy. We actually know how to do this. We know there's no great debate about what motivates or what changes behaviour. We actually know what changes behaviour. The biggest issue is that we don't have honest conversations and talk about the trade-offs in a way that actually means that we can move the conversation on. And so parking needs to be a big instrument in this, and certainly any new development from this point onwards needs to be restricted in terms of the car parking capacity that it has. It's not car parking charges that change the most behaviour. It's the capacity, it's the number of car parking spaces that needs to be restricted in order for it to change behaviour. So they're my main components. I know they're not going to be popular, but this is how I see it. And as I say, I'm not feeling very, very welcoming of conversations talking about small elements of changes that we can do here and there, because we know that that's the way we've dealt with things for the last 4 decades, and we've not actually made any impact whatsoever with respect to congestion and carbon. And so we've got to do something different. Thanks.
Gillian, thank you very much indeed for sharing with us those views. I think a lot of people will view them as radical, but that's exactly what you wanted to do, and you've put your case extremely clearly, and it's interesting to see how people respond. So very grateful for your input. I should say, by the way, that we didn't pump prime the speakers to go down any particular avenue. It's entirely up to them what they say. But that was a very thought-provoking presentation. Thank you very much indeed. We'll move on now, if we may, to James Beresford, who is the Deputy Chair of the Peak District. Now, he's on a mobile phone in Norfolk, so we hope the IT works with him. So over to you, James.
Thanks, Steve. Well, good morning, everybody. As Steve has said, I am currently on holiday, walking the Norfolk coastal path. So I'm not feeling remotely grumpy. I'm feeling quite relaxed, other than the fact that if we go on for far too long this morning, I may well end up in divorce courts, and that might make me grumpy. But anyway, listen, I am, as Steve has said, the Deputy Chair of the Peak District National Park Authority. Prior to that, I was Chief Executive of the English National Tourist Board. So I have a certain perspective to bear on visitors as well as residents, living now, as I do, in the middle of the Peak District. Listen, I don't have any bon mots necessarily, but I will share your pain to a certain extent, and I will share some of the thought processes that we're going through here, well, not here, but in the Peak District National Park. So a little bit, I don't have any slides either, because I'm on holiday. I could do a few face bits, but I don't have any slides. So just about us in the Peak District National Park and our particular situation with transport, really. We sit in the middle of a particularly heavily urbanized areas, heavily populated urbanized areas. We are surrounded by Sheffield, Huddersfield, Oldham, Stoke, Manchester, Derby, Nottingham, Chesterfield. We sit right in the middle of that innovation, that conurbation. And as a result, we have something like 26 million trips per year to the park. 95% of that are made by car, and predominantly that's day visitors. Yes, we have staying visitors, but the vast majority of those 26 million trips are made by day visitors. And as a consequence, we have severe honeypot concentration, traffic congestion, and erosion. It's interesting just to hear one of the many things that Gillian said about restricting car parking spaces. Every time we try and do that, people park on the verge, which really exacerbates erosion. I'm not saying that's not the right thing to do, but it's a consequence of either putting the prices up or limiting the parking spaces. And we're also fairly unique insofar as we only have one town in the Peak District, and that is Bakewell. So guess what? Everybody descends on Bakewell en masse. So it's a busy place. And we have done research works to say that 500,000 tons of carbon are emitted by cars every year. 500,000 tons of carbon. 90% of that figure is from visitor traffic. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're doing not dissimilar, taking a not dissimilar approach to that which you are, trying to get one conversation about what needs to be done and what can be done. And of course, I'm with Gillian insofar as draconian measures will probably be the only thing to get us to a better position. However, that doesn't negate the need for us to take more positive steps in the meantime. So what we're trying to do is gather one discussion. Now, it's not easy for us because we have a multiplicity of transport authorities and transport providers. We have a multiplicity. So one conversation is difficult. We have no en route train service. So people aren't going elsewhere in the country on a train when they visit us because we only have end-to-end train services. So what we really need is to assemble a compelling evidence-based conversation. Now, like you, I suspect that the vast majority of conversations are anecdotal. Oh, I remember I couldn't get the bus to here, or this visitor was stranded here, or it's too expensive. What we want is an evidence-based conversation. So we've embarked on some analysis. We're mapping the routes as they stand, and we're mapping it in a way that it's not point to point, it's door to door. It's door to door, because you can say, yes, well, if there's a better bus service from Nottingham to Bakewell, then everybody will use it. Well, no, because you've got to get from the outskirts of Nottingham to the centre to get the bus. And then when you get to Bakewell in the middle of the Peak District, you've got to get elsewhere. So we're doing end-to-end analysis, cost, user profile, and we've also embarked on vehicle mapping through a phone company. So we know where cars are going. It sounds a bit big brotherish, but we know where cars are going. And we also happen to know what sort of cars are going where, which really is fascinating. We can break it down. And again, it gets us away from the anecdotal, there were far too many cars on this road and on this day. We actually know when there were far too many cars on any given road at any time. But most importantly for us in trying to define this conversation that's joined up conversation is a non-user survey. So we're currently conducting a non-user public transport survey. And yes, the inevitable response coming through, it's too expensive, it's not reliable, it's not flexible, etc., etc. But the vast majority of non-users are saying at the moment, we would never use public transport. We are too wedded to our cars. So I think, taking a leaf out of Gillian's book, are we ever going to make material change by just improving services and connectivity and cost and so on and so forth? Now, that's not to say we don't believe that you need to make improvements. But if a large percentage of those being surveyed are saying, we will never use a bus, that shows, I think, the magnitude of the problem. So our aspiration really, coming at it from a very, very, very busy part of the world, is that we need better public transport, more responsive, demand responsive, cheaper, more connected, all of those things we all know about. But that isn't enough. It isn't enough, but we need to aspire to trying to do that. And of course, the issue of recreation hubs and also gateway hubs, entry sites, all of those things we are addressing at the moment. We have a developer on the edge of the park working just outside the park on a key peak gateway, which is going to be a resort, but will service the Peak District with hydrogen buses and so on and so forth. Now, you know, it'll only scratch the surface, but it shows intent. It shows intent. We have another opportunity, really, because, as I said, we don't have any en route transport via rail in our area, in the Peak District, but we have a service that goes from Manchester to Buxton at the north end of the park, and from Derby and Nottingham into Matlock at the south end. Now, they don't connect, but we have something called the Monsell Trail, which is on the old railway line that used to connect those two centres. And for about 3/4 of that old line, it's a right of way, it's a cycle route, it's the Monsell Trail. It's just wonderful. We have 400,000 visitors using it every year, walking or cycling. What we want to do is extend that trail from Buxton to Matlock. That joins up either ends. Now, it's not cheap, but it's likely to happen because it happens to be in our county council's capital programme. And what that does to us, rail to trail, is it makes travel fun. Now, you know, if we can make travel fun, enjoyable, i.e. get on the train with your bike and then cycle right into the heart of the Peak District, from wherever which way you come, north or south, it's making it fun. Far too many people at the moment get the bikes, put them on the car, and then come into the park with their cars and bikes on top of the cars. So what we want to do is make it fun, and fun to get around the place too, because once you use that rail to trail link, then you can access off to other parts of the park. So, you know, I'm not feeling too gloomy. I think we do have opportunities, but you got to make it fun. So, you know, just going back to my earlier point about we will never change people's attitudes. We've got to try. And I think national parks have the opportunity. They are much loved places, and not just by the people who are fortunate enough to live in them, but those many millions of visitors who want to enjoy the place, to get physical and mental stimulation. So we need to turn the conversation around. We want our visitors who come to love the place and care for the place. So tread lightly when you travel is going to be our message. Tread lightly. You know, don't just come with your, don't make solo journeys. Think about how you get here. Your responsible travel, however it may be, is actually loving the place that you're in danger of killing. It's quite a hard message, but we need to turn that corner to have that message. And equally, you know, draconian measures, yes, of course, they may be necessary in the short to medium term, but tourism is the principal industry in the Peak Park at the moment, and we can't afford to kill it. We can't afford to kill it. So there has to be a period of understanding the needs of businesses that make a living in the park. And we also, I think, as we've already heard, said that, you know, we are not giving enough reference to underserved communities. We are, as I said, surrounded by heavily urban areas, heavily populated urban areas. Most of those folks don't actually come into the park. They tend to be white, middle-class, car-owning public, and or people on the bus pass. So, you know, we have to think about targeted access for groups. And we're certainly doing that through our Mosaic program, but it needs to be extended. So I will finally say this is very helpful for me to be part of the conversation today. I don't have any lessons for you in the Lake District. I share your pain. I think we should learn lessons across the peak, across the national park family, without a doubt. We need one conversation. We need one conversation that can convince government that actually these are special places created as special places. And right now we need these special places to be protected, preserved, shared responsibly for the health of the nation. So Steve, for me, sorry, no slides, but that's me for the moment. Thank you.
James, thank you so much. And it'd be very interesting, actually, if you've got a moment, just to, I mean, parks are accessible by all. That's the ambition of them. And you've picked up on the challenges that were set out by Gillian earlier. How long do you think it would take, and is the benefit in the parks working together to move to?
Well, the parks, I mean, Steve, I mean, the parks already work together at National Parks England. And, you know, we need to make sure that Julian Glover challenged us to be A, more accessible, and B, think more about sustainable transport, didn't he? And, you know, this is a conversation that, yes, we can make changes in our own areas, but we are a much stronger conversation if we have it together as a family of national parks. That is the only way that government will listen. And we all know that transport planning in this country is based on urban policy. It's not based on rural issues. So we need to change that conversation. We can do it together. We can do it together. How long? Oh, gosh, I don't know. How long's a piece of string? We can't afford to twiddle our thumbs. We've got to get on with it.
Thanks very much. And because we have a national and largely global objective by 2050 to decarbonise and achieve net zero. And obviously the Lake District has ambitions to do it much quicker than that, I think 2037. Thank you very much. That's really helpful, James. So going to James 2, which is James Blake, who's the CEO of the Youth Hostel Association, has a big presence in the National Park here in the Lake District. So James, over to you, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. If I just share my screen in the same question, I think just that Gillian put up. Does that have slides come up? Have we got the right view? Can somebody let me know?
We're in speaker view at the moment, James.
So that looks good then. So
well, no, we better
okay.
We could have an image of the main slide actually.
Yeah, let me just see if I can. Let's see if we can do that then. Does that? Oh no, that hasn't worked, has it? Let me try again. It was working earlier on, wasn't it? Inevitably.
You've got two screens open, so I think if you select the screen that has the full picture.
Yeah, let's try. What's that like?
Perfect.
But sorry, can I just try? If I do this, is that
no,
still
it's okay? It's okay, James. Leave it like that.
Is that so you're seeing the slides now?
Yeah,
the full slides. Great. Okay. So you think we'd get there on this, wouldn't you, by now? So, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm James Blake. As Steve said, I'm currently Chief Exec of the YHA and have been for the last 5 years. And before that, I had a career variously as a senior civil servant in central government, and then most recently in local government as a district council chief exec. So I've kind of seen these issues from a whole range of different perspectives. When I say it as a lifelong enthusiast and lover of the Lake District and a bit of a public transport nerd as well. So that's probably my background. I mean, today I've been asked to speak particularly from the point of view of a delivery organisation operating in the Lake District, with a particular focus for ensuring that any future vision for sustainable transport goes hand in hand with social inclusions. Perhaps I'm a bit more optimistic than Gillian that is possible. So I hope most of you will know about YHA. We've been around for over 90 years and we have more hostels in the Lake District than we have anywhere else. We have around 20. As you'll know, most of you, I imagine, they're all over the park, from those gateway settlements such as Ambleside and Keswick to some of the remotest we have, Black Sail iconically, but also even more remote actually is Skidder House, just north of Keswick. In the park, these are pre-pandemic figures, we welcomed around about 140,000 people per year and about 300,000 overnights. Just over a third of those were from young people under 26, either coming alone with their family or with their school, which I don't know for certain, but I would imagine makes us almost certainly the biggest accommodation provider in the park, as well, of course, as having a significant presence in local communities and as a local employer. And we do face the same challenges that others do around the impact of climate change and extreme weather. I'm sure many of you will remember pictures like that one on the bottom left. That's our hostel in Keswick in 2015 through the flooding there. So we kind of know very much the importance of trying to find a way which allows us to thrive as an organisation, but do so sustainably. And I suppose the thing about YHA is we're not just an accommodation provider. We're a charity and social enterprise with a mission that's all about access for all. You can see there our vision and mission. And our vision is that everyone has access to the benefits of adventure for the first time and for a lifetime, and that by 2030, every child can stay away from home, travel, experience adventure, access the outdoors, nature, culture, and heritage. And then, part of our vision is how we work with others to ensure that the inequality that means that's not the case at the moment can be tackled. And we do that particularly through providing youth hostels and experiences that we hope will improve health, well-being, and life skills. So what does that mean in terms of our priorities? Well, I'm not going to go through this list. This is the list in our long-term strategy. And there are some around impact and there are some around how we enable that impact to happen. But I've highlighted a number in red that I think are relevant to today's discussion, and indeed I think resonate with the Lakes Partnership Plan more generally. Key one around equal access. When we say we welcome all, that actually we really do mean all, but also around our role in helping to improve connections to nature, outdoors, and heritage. Many of the people that visit our hostels have never been to the countryside before, certainly never been to a national landscape before. But doing so in a way that works in step with local communities and ensures we set the best example that we can on sustainability and the environment, working with partners. And on that last question, I think we've made some good progress, but it is incremental, not radical. So in the 5 years before the pandemic, our energy use fell by 25%. At the same time, our guest numbers went up by 11%, and our staff transport emissions decreased by 33%. But clearly, there's still a way to go to get to net zero. So what do we know around inclusion access in the countryside? I think the evidence base there is growing all the time, accelerated in the pandemic. A number of recent studies, I've just mentioned a few on the slide here. So there's one that we did ourselves, an anthology, collecting views from what we called outside voices, perhaps people who didn't traditionally fill in the surveys that we all ask. A study by CPRE on access to nature in the countryside, a piece of work by the Pilgrim Trust and the organisation All the Elements. There's been a study by Natural England as well. And all of these basically asking, well, do we have equal access to the countryside, the outdoors, national parks, and if not, what the barriers might be? I mean, all of those concluded that access was very unequal. Just taking a specific example around demographic diversity, for example, we know that 20% of ethnic minority young people access the countryside or green spaces regularly near to where they live. It's 40% of white young people, and that's a pattern repeated for those on low incomes as well. And we know that that's particularly true even for those who live very close to national parks and AONBs. For example, you'll know that locally in the communities in West Cumbria, they are underrepresented in people who stay in our hostels in the Lake District, for example. And there's a kind of range of barriers to that, of which transport is important, but it's not the only one. But clearly a barrier that's going to be made worse by the current cost of living crisis. So I suppose for me, that's why any vision for an inclusive, sustainable transport system in the Lake District has to start with a vision for who we want to be in the Lake District in the future. And that, of course, links closely to the partnership plan theme around a Lake District for everyone. So I've started, in a sense, from what we in YHA as an organisation would want to see in 2030. That's the year of our centenary. We're looking forward to that. But I do think, I hope this is a vision that would apply to many other organisations too. So you can see that I've got 3 points there. In the first, and this mirrors what we have in our overall organisational strategy, to be certain that access for all really does mean all. That those people who stay with us, that benefit from what we do, our employees and our volunteers, reflect the wider population, socially, demographically and economically. And then specifically that every child within an hour of the Lake District has had the opportunity to have a night under the stars within the park. That is directly picking up on the Julian Glover commitment in his report. And we know at the moment that we're quite a long way from that being the case. But interestingly, there are now examples, and actually in Peak District is one of them, where we're starting to pick up specific commitments along those lines. And that no one is prevented from accessing our provision in the Lake District because of transport. And I suppose when I say transport, I'm very much with Gillian on this is transport, both getting to the park and then getting around within the park once we get there. So what does that mean for a future transport system? Well, it has to, I mean, these are not unfamiliar points, are they? But I mean, it has to be integrated between modes. Literally, I think joining up around the traveller with a clear customer journey, and say literally the customer journey. It needs to be accessible in all senses, physical, which is perhaps one that often gets focused on, but psychological as well. How do people feel welcome, as well as being able to get there? I think that picks up on James's point about people not feeling they'd ever use a bus. It needs to be affordable for those with limited means, particularly in a context where those means are coming under increasing pressure. And it does need to be flexible around the needs of today's traveller. That does mean people needing to get to shift work, for example, in agricultural tourism, and travellers who want to go to less frequented places, which of course helps with honeypot tourism. We'll also experience the lakes at non-conventional times. So how are we doing on all of that? Well, I think things are improving, but there is still a long way to go. What you see on this slide is just a little experiment I did yesterday when I was putting this together. So in the weather forecasts, I think it's great today in the lakes, but it's looking much better for tomorrow. So I thought, right, well, can I get to the Lake District, to one of our key gateway hostels from London if I left after work at 5 p.m. by public transport. The good news is things like Google Maps now are brilliant at integrated transport, easy to find all the options at the touch of a button. And I found I could get there, but the route involves a train and 3 buses, takes me via Carlisle, Maryport and Workington, eventually arriving in Keswick at midnight. And of course, that's mainly because the much easier route, which would take you from Penrith to Keswick, doesn't operate at a time that would connect with anyone leaving major cities after work on Friday. And then if you do decide to do that, then from affordability point of view, the only train tickets left, this was yesterday, middle of yesterday, are a first class advanced single costing you £200 for the journey. And that's Keswick. If you imagine the rest of our 20 hostels in the Lake District, it's nearly impossible to get there at the moment, with the possible exception of Ambleside and Grasmere. So that there are still clearly work to do and some challenges there. I mean, accessibility information is definitely getting much better. So as I said earlier, particularly for physical mobility, some really good examples of work that's been done and is now kind of widely available on the National Park website and elsewhere. But there are still some sort of wider challenges. I know for ourselves in YHA, we pride ourselves on having accessible rooms, but we rarely have more than 1 or 2 in any one place. So if you're coming with friends or with a group, that's not going to work for you. And it's still really early days, isn't it, for organisations providing, for example, prayer rooms or spaces for those with autism or other accessibility issues. So I think there are those issues. And then I suppose that point finally about flexibility is really important. And it does need to be something that reflects that people increasingly want more unique and unusual experiences, and that is something that the park is promoting. So they, for example, there from the park website around dark skies and stargazing, well, that doesn't happen at times that public transport operates. So how do we design a transport system that allows people to have those unique experiences, which happen in times and places not currently served by public transport? So that's about transport and work we need to do on the transport system itself. But I suppose what some of those recent studies I put up earlier do show is that fixing transport's no good unless you look at the wider social and cultural environment within which it sits. And perhaps there might be a difference between what Gillian was saying, what I'm saying here on that. Because fundamentally, you need to start with whether people feel welcome in the outdoors at all, you know, and that will determine on whether people will then use a transport system. I mean, language plays a really important part in this. So what does it mean to be, for example, an outdoorsy person? You know, I've always been proud of myself to think as an outdoorsy person. But the poem on the left, which was written by a contributor to our Outdoor Citizens anthology, Outside Voices anthology, really made me think. You know, I'm most of these things, so no wonder I feel part of that community. But who doesn't? And then, how welcoming is the language we take for granted on our signs and notices? You know, how macho is the language we use about the outdoors in our literature? How much is available in languages other than English? How suitable and affordable is things like outdoor kit for people of different sizes, shapes, and faiths? And even our much loved historic footpath signs. You know, where is this place called public footpath that things direct us to? You know, how useful is a sign that doesn't tell you where it goes? In most other countries, your signage tells you where to go, how long it will take, and helps you on the way. And I suppose the broader point I'm making there is about thinking about the way in which information will be interpreted by those people who we want to come, and how that can then encourage people to make and nudge people towards making those sustainable choices, both in getting to and getting around in the park. So there are challenges, but I do think there is stuff to celebrate too. I think there are solutions developing, and some of those have been accelerated, I think, through the pandemic. You know, and that is whether that is initiatives designed to encourage sustainable trips into the outdoors. People have mentioned things like e-bike stations. They're not the radical solution, but they are a step on the road. We ourselves this year we put on our very first festival of walking in Whiteshare. The idea of that is to encourage people to travel sustainably to our hostels and then to walk from them when they get there. That's been really interesting for us. I think one of the things the research tells us is that a greater diversity of role models within our countryside and parks is really important, whether that's visitors, hosts, leaders, or volunteers. That can really encourage people to feel welcome and not isolated in the outdoors and in the countryside. And then linked to that, I guess, but the development of groups who can provide support, encouragement, solidarity, community, and indeed sustainable transport options like buses to those visiting the outdoors, perhaps the most critical factor of all. Lots of brilliant examples of this. I put up one, which it's been prominent in the news, which is Muslim hikers. But what we've done in Whiteshare is we've now set up a community of practice called Outdoor Citizens. We've linked together 46 of those groups and providing resources, support, funding to those who do want to access the outdoors sustainably. And as I think James was saying, there are other projects around. One of the ones in the Peak District in the Hope Valley, which we're part of, is called Travelling Light, which is now getting to an implementation stage, I think, around how might an integrated system work. So I suppose for me, finally, I do think I'm perhaps a bit more optimistic. I think if we can do this right, there is a win-win option here. There is a real opportunity to create a kind of virtuous circle, if you like, you know, so that you have a wider range of people coming into the park. That will support business and it will support the local economy. Of course, those wider range of visitors generally are less likely to have access to a car, so actually do help to underpin the business case for better public transport. And that's where I think there's a really interesting win-win. If people are well supported coming into the park, then it's much easier for them to work in harmony with the place, community, and people. And if it's well designed from the outset, better transport will help local communities and local residents too. And it creates that tipping point where actually you get a virtuous circle of transport that has a business case that works, that's viable, that's frequent, well used. And I think that starts to really get you towards that more radical, sustainable transport future. And I'll leave it there, Steve. Okay.
James, thank you very much, and very wide-ranging presentation. And I'm sure, as is the aim of the whole of today, that will provoke a lot of thought and input to the process as we move forward. So finally, our fourth presentation is from Stephen Joseph, a Transport and Travel Advisor. So Stephen, over to you, if I may, and then we'll take a quick break.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yes, so I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see how this works. Does that, hang on, share screen, let's try that. Has that worked?
Not yet.
We can see you, Stephen.
Right, okay.
That's it.
That's what, Stephen,
Fine.
you're away.
Right, good. Okay, yes, let me introduce myself first. I'm a transport policy consultant. I'm also a part-time professor at the University of Hertfordshire, which has a smart mobility unit. I'm involved, I'm also a trustee and chair of the Foundation for Integrated Transport, which has funded various projects around sustainable transport, including visitor travel in national parks, and I'll mention one or two of those later. But I'll take this as the University of Hertfordshire, which is a non-urban university, and that's has its own interests. So it, for example, the university runs its own bus company, Uno, has its own travel plan, and has a range of other things. So the smart mobility unit is multidisciplinary and does a range of things, and is part of other university teams. What I'm going to talk about, in some ways, firstly, I'm going to apologise to Gillian because some of what I'm going to talk about is e-bikes and demand-responsive transport. But also, I think in some ways the situation's worse than Gillian said, because transport research and policy, as various people have said, including in the chat, focused on cities. James Beresford made this comment too. There hasn't been enough or very much attention by policymakers or the research community actually on what you do about transport outside cities. And I don't just mean Cumbria, I mean places like Cheshire, Hertfordshire on the edge of city regions. There isn't a lot of work done on what you do about those places. What has frustrated me, if you wanted my inner grumpiness to come out, is the fact that whenever anybody in any media, mainstream media, writes about transport in any way, shape or form, below the line comments, and this goes as much in the Guardian and the New Statesman as it does in places like the Mail and the Telegraph, goes, well, it's all very well you people living in London where you've got some public transport, but out here, outside those places, everybody has to drive very big SUVs everywhere and there's absolutely no alternative. We've just got to get on and provide the car parking for it. And that's the starting point that we are. So where I came from in this was actually to start to say, actually, can we do something about this? And as I've said in this slide, places outside cities are very varied. Some are prosperous, high car ownership, severe traffic congestion, smaller coastal towns with a lot of poverty. Most in some cases have more poor or no or very expensive public transport and lots of car-based development. And we've been running round tables. We did a set of round tables in 2020 to start to develop a research and policy agenda for these places, and we did another set this summer which we're in the process of writing up. And I'm just going to put up some key points coming out of these. Firstly, it is possible to provide public and shared transport in rural areas for visitors and residents that people will use. Secondly, there are new forms of mobility, e-bikes, e-scooters, e-cargo bikes, car sharing, car clubs, etc., that can offer an alternative to traditional car use in rural areas. And there can be alternatives to drowning and visitor traffic mayhem, and bringing all these things together with rural hubs can help local economies and communities, and a number of places in the UK are doing this, or at least starting to. As I say, this is going to sound like that I'm falling into the trap that Gillian set us of just talking about individual projects. But as you'll see, I end up at Gillian's point at the end. I think the first point to say is that we do have, is to start with the data. And I'm with James Beresford very much on this. And I've just put up here a few bits of data that I was able to pull off the internet yesterday about impacts of travel in Cumbria and the Lake District. So you can find out about air pollution for any address. You can find out about road casualties. You can find out about carbon emissions, Ambleside's transport carbon emissions from the Carbon Place. It's a place-based carbon calculator. I think some of Gillian's colleagues were involved in developing it, actually. You can find out about carbon emissions from commuting. So I looked up Eden's. They're around the national average. Actually, Eden is doing quite well, 35% zero carbon commuters. This is from the Mobility Ways thing. And there's also been a recent report by Transport for the North on transport-related social exclusion, which highlights Copeland and Allerdale as having among the highest rates of transport-related social exclusion, actually, I think, in across the North. So, and my point here is there is data out there, and some other places are using this and other data like Experian and Mosaic consumer data to analyze travel patterns and develop services and policies based on these. So the Western Gateway, which is the Transport for the North equivalent for the Southwest, has just produced a rural mobility strategy, which is based on this. And what they've done is to say, so what can we, what places are likely to use what kind of services, what things will work in different areas. So I think that's, so my first point is, let's get the data. Some of the data is already there. We can do more with it. Secondly, I'm just going to pick up some directions of travel from the roundtables. And the first point is around public transport. It is possible to improve rural public transport. I'm going to talk a fair bit about Cornwall in a minute, because as a rural area in England with a large visitor and travel population in the summer, challenges of that, and some of the things they've done about that. And there are other examples like Sevenoaks, which has local town buses and demand responsive transport working alongside ordinary buses, Herefordshire, which has been running free buses at weekends, and so on. And there is also demand responsive transport. There are clear cases of that. There are different providers of that. I put some of the links up on the screen. And that's a picture of a demand responsive transporting vehicle in Hertfordshire. But there's a lot of this going on now. And I think the difference between where we've got to on this, between the past where lots of people have done dial-a-ride and demand responsive transport, is that with new technology and new data, we can, these can be a lot better run and a lot more interested, but I'll come to some of the things around that. Cornwall. Cornwall has created patiently over a number of years something they call the One Public Transport System for Cornwall. I should say Cornwall Council
Stephen, if you can hear me, you're frozen.
Is that everybody?
Clouds very effectively, and this is work in progress. This is clearly work in progress, but it is they have created an integrated transport system, a single brand, Transport for Cornwall, integration of timetables, unified information platforms for users, a single ticking purchasing act, integration of payment systems, and cuts in fares. I should say I'm a little evangelical about this because I've just had 10 days holiday in Cornwall, and we drove down there because there wasn't a car club and some of the things that people have been talking about, and Gillian and others have been talking about. But our car, in the 10 days, our car moved 3 times because the public transport was there. We were able to get to visitor attractions, and they've got London style tap on, tap off. So you get on the bus, you tap on with your bank card, and you tap off when you leave, and it's charged to your card. And the ticketing and all the buses for different operators use that. And their town zones, they've got town zones in which adults pay for a day £2.50, a week ticket is £10, and there are discounts for under 19s, and across all of Cornwall, an all-day fare is £5 or £4 for under 19s, and there are weekly and monthly, and also family tickets, 2 adults and unlimited children under 16 for £10 a day or £40 a week. So they've done that, they're actually doing some of this stuff. And they've tied their showcase corridors in with their travel to work trips, their new housing targets, and so on. This is a sort of London Underground style map with the icons showing fare paying passenger households, population, housing targets, and so on in different places with bus and rail. What are the lessons for the Lake District? Well, they have, Cornwall has been building high quality interchanges and bus stations, some next to rail stations. That's St Austell, you come out of the rail station, there's a bus station, real-time information on the buses, which tell you where to get to, say, the Eden project or the Lost Gardens of Heligan, and the services are linked to those, and some of them are offering discounts. If you go to the Eden project by bus, you get a free program, a free guide, and so on. As I say, there's a multi-operator ticketing offer, and they're developing clock-face timetables on the Zurich model. And as I say, this isn't yet finished. It's clearly work in progress, and the pandemic derailed a lot of this completely. But it's now back on track, and above all, they've had, and I think this is the key point, a clear long-term strategy to attract public and private investment. And all of this is carrot. I think it's fair to say that if you talk to the officers, they do have plans for the stick. They do know that they've got to restrict travel into places like St Ives, which they already happens, and other places, and a wider car-free restrictions. But they wanted to get this system in first, and certainly parking charges are on their list of things to do in this place. So, as I say, I'd point to Cornwall because I absolutely agree with Gillian about Zurich, but I wanted to point to somewhere a bit closer with rather similar powers that seems to be doing things. So on visitor travel, it is difficult, but there are some initiatives to point out. Snowdonia, I know this is an issue for James because the youth hostel at Penny Pass has been unfairly impacted by this, but Snowdonia has introduced pre-booked parking at the main honeypot site. The funding, so you have to pre-book, and it costs a lot. I think it's £18 to park at that place, and the money goes into paying for park and ride Sherpa shuttle buses, and these are now being refined with better local and long distance buses. And in answer to something that somebody put in the chat, there's also rigorous enforcement of traffic parking restrictions on the verges. And it's worth saying that last year, when this first came in, a large number of vehicles got towed away by the police. This year, very few have, because everybody understands that that's the rule, and you don't park along the verges of the roads because you will get towed away. There hasn't, it's worth saying, been a huge shout about this. There hasn't been vast numbers of petitions or comments from businesses. I think it's worth saying, before James does, that the youth hostel has been, I think, ignored by some of this. But I think there is an attempt to try, and I think they're now actually talking to you. But in principle, this seems to have worked in terms of managing traffic for a very, very heavy honeypot site. And I think it's just worth pointing that out. I should say one of the other things I'm doing at the moment is I'm on North Wales Transport Commission, which is a Welsh Government initiative set up by the Welsh Government to look at what to do about travel across North Wales. We are looking at what this might mean in practice and how this might develop in the future, with a view to looking at how people, like James's staff at the youth hostel get there, rather than, but with some of the principles that Gillian set out in mind as a way forward. And the Welsh Government is doing significant development of its longer distance Tros Cymru bus network, its flexible bus networks, as well as the Sherpa shuttle buses. Two others I'd briefly mention. Peak District, actually, James has already mentioned this. Hope Valley Climate Action has developed the Travelling Light project, which the Foundation for Integrated Transport funded, and this has now got government funding to move forward to look at how they've developed a blueprint for decarbonising travel in the Hope Valley, and are now starting to take that forward. And I hope that James and Beresford and his colleagues will be able to give it support. But that's an interesting one. And Loch Lomond in Scotland has developed a sustainable and active travel plan, is developing planning guidance, which relates to some of the comments that Gillian made and some of the people in the chat have made about how you actually make this work in practice, and journey apps to support this. I think that's another interesting place to do this. So in James Beresford's comment about the park community getting together, I think there are some places out there that are already doing some stuff in which could act as exemplars. Very briefly, some other ways forward that came out of the roundtables. Lift sharing can increase car occupancy, and this is true for commuting and business travel. Lift Share, who set up something called Mobility Ways, have been they're the source of that average commuter emissions level data that I showed at the start, and they've worked out ways, we're working with employers to reduce single occupancy car commuting, and even in really quite rural areas, places like Norfolk, and for, say, journeys to hospitals and for staff travel to hospitals and so on, and have been able to measure carbon reductions from those. The shared mobility, there are a range of options there: car clubs, shared bike and e-bike schemes, e-scooters. There are a range of options there, and this is already happening in Cumbria. Enterprise already setting up car clubs. That's for example, one in Penrith. So some of this is already happening. Actually, again, a personal anecdote. I went to South Devon last year, and staying in a converted paper mill, and before we got there, we were sent a link to hire e-bikes, which we did from a new business that had just set up. It didn't have any local support of any sort, local public sector support. He'd just done it, and he'd been inundated with business. My sense is there's quite a lot of that going on already just by the private sector. And then there are concepts of rural hubs, bringing different transport modes together, maybe with local services and workspaces for remote working. And this is something that the Welsh Government has been busy promoting. It's got a target of 30% remote and hybrid working. And the Combined Mobility UK group has been looking at this. And Midlands Connect, the subnational transport body equivalent to Transport for the North, has been promoting hubs, including, I think, around the Peak District, in places like Buxton. That's a picture of one opening in Scotland there in a new housing development. As I've said, bringing it all together, there are options there. There are delivery hubs with cargo bikes, first last mile. That picture is of Todmorden in the Pennines, not too far from the Lake District, where there's the Cargo Dale e-bike delivery service that's now expanding to other towns in the Pennines. There's the concept of total transport. What you find often is there are bespoke transport services for health and social services and education, and that actually integrating those, which Padam Mobility have been doing a lot of in other places, can actually provide more efficient and better services, but with using the same vehicles for different uses. You could have joint ticketing information. The Highlands has, which is about as unpromising a place as you could think of to do integrated transport, has a mobility as a service Go High app, which is those phone pictures on the bottom right. And there are also, as we found from the round tables, various people with methods of involving people in decisions on transport, such as Commonplace, Padaris and Mobility Lab. Here's my scenarios for the future.
I'm going to have to interrupt you and ask you to just speed up toward the close if you wouldn't mind.
This is the close. My scenarios for the future: do nothing, business as usual, gradually worsening traffic, choking Lake District roads and towns, limited access to jobs for those without cars, and high carbon emissions. You can follow current best practice, as it were, which I've set out here: better public transport, e-bikes, travel plans, visitor management plans, etc. And then, and I think this is where I've come up back to where Gillian started from, a leadership strategy, a scenario, an overarching strategy and vision to attract public and private funding and work with partners, integrated bus and rail services with integrated ticketing, maybe a Lake District card, car-free areas, and so on. And my argument is that it is possible to cut vehicle mileage. There are examples the Lake District could look to, but it needs to decide which direction to go in. Of course, some of this needs government support. More longer-term funding would be better, but the Lake District can start now and make better use of what exists. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much. And it's very helpful to have those examples elsewhere that demonstrate to varying degrees how much can be achieved. So the schedule now is, the next thing we would like to do is just put up the same questions again, Lorraine, so that we can see whether the impact of the presentations has shifted people's perceptions and ambitions.
So Steve, can you see that poll now?
Yes, that's fine. And if people wouldn't mind just ticking that, while I just say what I think we're going to do next, which is just take a 5-minute break, if we may, just to ensure everybody's comfort as we proceed toward 11 o'clock. And then at just before past, we'll kick off again. We won't wait for everybody to get back if you're late. Probably isn't time to make a cup of coffee, but maybe a glass of water. So over to you. And have we got the result, Lorraine? Or?
We're just getting results in. We've had 50, we've had 57 of 74 responses. So it's just going up just a little bit more. Give it one more moment and then we'll look at the results.
This is like election night, isn't it?
It is indeed. It is indeed. And we can see that it's changing. So I'm going to end the poll now. And then I'll share the results. So you can see that there are less people looking at the status quo, really, status quo with new car parks, and a mix of people looking at the management and then the fundamental change. So interesting to see how the speakers have affected that. Thank you very much for participating, everybody.
Yeah, so we'll be back together in 5 minutes then. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. And thank you to the 4 presenters.
James, we can see you sideways on the screen because I've now got you pinned as a speaker because you'll be on the panel for the next piece. That's better. Thank you.
Give a 2-minute warning for those of you that have gone to make tea or coffee.
Steve, I've pinned the speakers, so you should see a screen with the 4 speakers and yourself on it.
Not yet.
Is anybody seeing that?
For now,
You may.
Lorraine, can you see me?
I can see you, James. Yes, thank you.
You're right. I don't know. This is the first time I've done a Zoom on a mobile phone. It's sort of works.
Yes, it does sort of work, doesn't it? But we got you. We got your presentation, so thank you for that.
That's okay. All right, there we are.
So Lorraine, I can see 20 or so people on my screen. So
Okay. I'm being told that I think what you need to do is go to view at the top of your screen. Everybody on the call needs to go view at the top of the screen and go for speaker.
You're doing a good job, Steve.
And click speaker view, and then you'll get the 5 panelists because I've pinned them to the screen.
that's very good. That's worked.
Okay.
And the speaker will come up for other participants.
Yes. So Steve, when everybody's back, if you just remind them that if they go to view at the top of their screen and go to speaker, then they can get the panel.
Okay. 15 seconds to go.
Steve, your camera's not on. I don't know if that's intentional.
That's because I'm fundamentally shy, Lorraine.
I can't say I've noticed.
Right. The eggs are cooked. So we still have 75 people participating. So that's a very good start. Only one person has dropped off so far. First of all, just a bit of a quick summary. We heard from Gillian, fairly hard-hitting pitch, saying that we can't be timid. We've got to go straight toward a very radical end point. James gave us a lot of very good parallels, James Beresford, with the Peak District National Park. Similar number of visitors, perhaps. Similar issues with terminal railway stations and so on. And the same issues with motor vehicles. Then we heard from James Blake, who really very adeptly addressed the issues of social exclusion by virtue of transport and how they might be addressed, and talked very eloquently about integrated and accessible and affordable and flexible travel mechanisms, and the importance of making the place welcoming. And a lot of action has been taken on being more welcoming in the park, but not especially with regard to transport. And then finally, Stephen, I think, did an excellent job in sharing with us the feasibility of this and the fact that people have made very significant progress in different parts of the UK as well as overseas. But if we're to accept what Gillian says, nobody has yet gone for the ultimate hard, more radical approach. So with that background, perhaps we can step into a few questions. The thing that struck me was the unanimity amongst the speakers that the car is something that needs to be moderated or even excluded if you're more extreme in your views. And Gillian, of course, said that it's all cars, not just excluding carbon emitting internal combustion engine vehicles, which is an even more radical perspective because of other aspects of their impact on the environment. So I'm looking for a speaker to volunteer to address the question of how we migrate from where we are to that more radical view, if indeed that's accepted. And how do we see that happening? And the incremental steps that can be made. I've got a hand up by Chris Willis, who is not a speaker, I don't think, but will one of the speakers like to address that? And thank you very much, James Beresford.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite so fixed on the big radical solution straight away, because it would, I accept it needs to be done. I'm more of the bite-sized chunks kind of approach to life. And the Hope Valley Climate Action Group work here in the Peak District mentioned, as have other examples, all of which are slightly different. And Cornwall has one transport authority and one local authority, and so on and so forth, making those things easier. But that's not to say one shouldn't try. I think there is some mileage in looking at localized solutions and joining them together within the umbrella of a big conversation, a tough conversation. So I think there's some mileage in chipping away at it, in making advances before you get to the need for the big conversation, because the big challenge, because it's just a feeling, and that knowing the way in which government works and local authorities work and communities have their say. Don't forget, well, certainly in the Peak District, 35,000 people actually live in the Peak District and make a living in the Peak District too. I think there's a way of approaching this, Steve, and it's, from my point of view anyway, and others will doubtless not agree, I think it's a case of small steps. I forget, was it Stephen who mentioned the Snowdonia example of saying, yes, the first year they started towing cars away, but the second year they did that in lesser numbers. And I think it's just, it demonstrates how you do it incrementally rather than from the get-go. So yes, cars are the big bad wolf here. They are. But tackling it in bite-sized chunks is probably the better way in terms of getting over the line.
Great. Now, all our speakers have their hands up, so I'm going to ask them to give brief responses. Gillian, you were radical.
Okay.
Well, right to take such a stepwise approach, or should we really go for it?
Thanks. I mean, I think there's what I really must clarify is that my approach was not saying that we need to do this overnight, that the first thing that you do is make cars unwelcome in the park and not allow them and charge them. The first thing you do is to put in the alternatives to the car mainly. But what you have to do first is have the target date by which cars are going to be subject to these restrictions and these prices. And then you have the map of how to get between here and now. So everything that is done, every conversation that is had, all engagement that's had, all business models that's done, all evidence that is collected, is all under the umbrella of, from X date, this is what's going to happen with respect to access and charging of cars into the park. And that fits with evidence elsewhere where cars have been restricted. Nowhere has it been done on the geographical scale that we're talking about. But where there has been congestion charging or road space taken away in places where the alternatives have been put in first, this is what's led to the success. I think the other thing that has to happen now is to do with some of the evidence base. Now, I'm not saying that just because I'm an academic and I like to do research and collect evidence, and I certainly don't want the collection of data and evidence to hold anything up. I actually think we've got a lot of information right now, but the sort of thing I mean is what's the things that are missing, I think, to be able to have this conversation politically and to have better public engagement are things about what the current situation and the business as usual situation is costing and will continue to cost in economic terms, in social terms. And that includes things like who is not coming to the park right now, because I think there was a comment in the chat, and there will be comments about how this will mean that people won't come to the park. There are plenty of people, including myself, that won't come to the Lake District now. And do we have data on that? That's the kind of data that you need. You need to think about what the arguments against is and see what the evidence is to back up those arguments or refute those arguments, because otherwise there's no chance.
Okay. Thanks, Gillian. Evidence-based required. Coming over to James and Stephen next, but just to say a couple of things. One is, the question in my mind is who's responsible for leading this? And this is a point that was made by several of the speakers, and reference is made to the local transport authority. Now today, Cumbria has one covering the Lake District as well. Julian Glover advocated an experiment of the Lake District becoming a transport authority, but now it's divided from April next year into 2 transport authorities who may or may not cooperate to a degree. And I don't think that facilitates the objective we're trying to achieve. So if anybody wants to pick up on that, I'll turn to James first, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I was just going on the original point more, I guess, but and I agree with, I think, both Gillian and James, that you can be radical in your ambition, but then you need a workable phased plan that keeps the carrots and the sticks in step if you're not to lose people on the way and indeed have unintended consequences. I think we're probably all in agreement on that. Just the point I wanted to make was around the devil being in the detail on implementation, and this is and I'm going to use the Snowdonia example, and Stephen referred to it in his talk as well, because there, just for in case people don't know, we have a hostel at the top of the park, at the top of the pass, right next to the car park there. So and the situation there was an absolute nightmare. It was a really good example where an urgent intervention was needed, and we're very supportive of that. I think the issue there was the way it was done has left some real problems for us as a charity and as a business there. So now, if you want to come for the weekend, you might want to come for the weekend and not use your car at all, because the reason you've decided to stay at the hostel is so you can access Snowdon right off your doorstep. It now costs you £80 if you arrive on a Friday evening, you leave on a Sunday morning. So it costs you far more to park there than it does to stay there. But there were some very simple things that could have been done around, just in terms of ensuring the bus allow people to get there and get out again at the times that people come. And indeed just having a conversation with us and other businesses before it was done. So I think that was a shame for me, because so that's where I'm slightly grumpy, because I think the principles were absolutely right, but the devil was in the detail of implementation, and that has now left to a situation where largely anyone who isn't middle class and with a large car can't afford to stay there. And what that means is people are staying elsewhere and making the situation worse by coming up and down to the pass. So I think that the importance of collaborative solutions, and not trying to slow things down, but to ensure that you bring visitors, residents, and businesses with you is really important. But that shouldn't be at the cost of having a radical long-term vision.
Yeah, I think consultation is crucial in that, isn't it? And we'll hear more of that later. Stephen, do you want to come in briefly on the original question, or even the latter?
Yes,
Yes.
I just comment that centre parks make a rather good business out of this. You're not, you drive into the place, you dump all your stuff, and you're not allowed to drive in there for the rest of your stay, and you get bikes free. And nobody's made them do that. It's an attractive business proposition for them. I just mentioned that. The Snowdonia story seems to me a really interesting one, because it is effectively, it's a congestion charging in a national park. And I think the key point is that, unlike in urban areas and all the controversy around low traffic neighbourhoods and congestion charging in places like Cambridge and so on, actually people are ready, because they recognise the special nature of national parks. I think visitors in general are more willing to have this conversation, to have a new social contract, if you like, about how people access and travel around parks. I think that people might be more ready for this than they are for quite a lot of other traffic restraint measures in other areas, actually. And the Snowdonia story seems to have suggested that.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, buses seem to be a key component of everybody's vision for the future. Cumbria has a very limited bus service. I was taken by the Cornwall analogy where you can get a whole day's travel, or indeed was it a week's travel for £10. It costs you pretty much that for 2 people to travel from Ambleside out to Grasmere. So we have an expensive bus system here in Cumbria, and we don't have a subsidised bus system either, which is unusual in many parts of the UK. So I'm looking for hands on the buzzers for the first person to respond on how we might address improving a bus system and in the Lake District. Right, Stephen, you win.
Yeah, well, because I made such a big thing of this. Look, is this the case that Cornwall has started with somewhere that Cumbria hasn't, which is that it's always funded, subsidised some of its public transport. It's always done that. But that's not been, I think, the main point of what they've done. What they did was create, there's a sort of wheel they created, their chief officer created, called the One Public Transport Network for Cornwall, with little segments. And what they did was, as bits of money became available, different bids became available, they sort of grabbed them as they passed and funded different bits of links. So, for example, I mentioned tap-on, tap-off ticketing, which is what you find in places like London. But you've got it in Cornwall because the council got its local enterprise partnership to pay for the ticketing machines to go on every single bus operator, rather than funding the Next Road scheme. I mean, they funded the Next Road scheme, but they funded the ticketing machines from the local growth fund money that was around the place. They got European funding to upgrade the local rail service between Plymouth and Penzance. They got HS2 paid for a new sleeper train depot at Penzance, which happens to also service all the local trains through there, because the sleeper depot at Paddington was being taken down for HS2. So the point was to have a clear vision and strategy, very much along the lines of what Gillian suggested, a long-term strategy that says this is where we want to get to, this is how we'll do it. And yeah, and it is very much, I mean, avowedly a Swiss-based, a Zurich-style public transport network is what they're aiming at. Because you talk to the officers, that's what they tell you. So they, and so having that long-term strategy with a clear delivery plan of different bits of it and being able to slot in bits of funding has been key to what they've done. And I think that's the core point. I do think that Cumbria or its successor authorities are going to have to revisit its unsubsidised public transport approach, actually. I think partly because I think the evidence suggests that actually other public authorities such as health and social services and education are probably having to pay for pay for bespoke public transport services for their own reasons, and that actually if you make, as Cornwall have discovered actually, if you make some of this stuff mainstream, the costs from other budgets goes down. So I think it's worth looking at that. I mentioned total transport as the concept there in this. So that would be where I would start, looking at what transport services are being paid for by different public authorities and seeing whether you can bring those together to mainstream some of this. I noticed a comment in the chat about, well, was it all political? I think that it's kind of the reverse is the case, actually, that the government was prepared to throw money at Cornwall because of its political complexion, but there was a ready-made strategy for them to throw money at. And that's the core point, that they had the strategy, and when a Cornwall deal was in prospect, the officers put up various proposals, which included the ultimate concept of franchising if partnerships wouldn't work. But they've made partnerships work in a way that probably if the Competition and Markets Authority found out about some of their ticketing, they might ask some questions. But anyway, I think that what they've done is really interesting. And it's that long-term strategy. And this is, I think, where I and Gillian are sort of coming together, actually, in saying that's what's needed here. And I think the National Park can probably lead that. Your question about moving to 2 transport authorities, I think that means that there needs to be a transport partnership covering the Lake District Park that brings together not just the transport authorities, but some of the other authorities that I mentioned. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks very much. James has got his hand up, and happy to hear your comments on the previous question.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Stephen. It's about, it's about Angela, and it's about this conjoined, shared conversation and strategy. I absolutely agree with that. But at the same token, I think we have to be realistic, because at the end of the day, it's about money. Who has got the money? Where does the money come from to subsidize these services? We have 7 transport authorities in the Peak District, 7. I envy you having 2, should that be the case, but we have 7. Trying to get some unanimity across 7 is difficult. I suspect across 2 is difficult. I suspect 1 even isn't the easiest thing in the world, although Cornwall have clearly been very clever. But in these days of financial constraint, in these days of local authorities finding it hard to support social care and social services, why should they support bus services into these special places? That's the question. So our arguments, have to be very nuanced. It's not just for the sake of the places, it's for the people, it's for the nation. And I think that falls back to the National Parks family. We need to up our game as much as we can to be saying that these are special places that are important for the nation. They're not just for these areas, they are for the nation, for the health, the mental well-being of the population of the UK. It's very important because actually, who's going to put their hand in their pocket and say, right, we're going to subsidize these bus services? Who's going to do that? I don't know. And when you talk about leadership to the National Park authorities, I absolutely agree. But in defense of my friends and colleagues in the Lake District National Park Authority, they've had a flat cash agreement, as have we, for the next 3 years, which is not going to be inflation proofed. So we're going to be constrained. And, Gillian was talking about data and using data. We're doing our level best, but data costs, absolutely costs. I'm impressed that you've got a YouGov strategy going, but these things cost. We just simply don't have the money to do it. Now, I'm not sounding defeatist. I'm not. I'm just trying to overlay a view of realism. We've got to make sure that the conversation is so hard-hitting and not simply localized that we get the funders to be able to recognize our importance across so many facets, of which public transport is one.
Thank you very much. And James Blake, you've got your hand up, but I'd quite like to move the subject on a little bit from where we got to here. And maybe you would be kind enough to address the following without giving you much time to reflect on it, which is, there's been conversations in the Lake District National Park about congestion charging or sustainability charging or road traffic use charging. But there's an attitude amongst some people that it'll kill off the visitor economy. There is almost inevitably a national program of road charging heading our way at some time in the future. So you could argue, why go through all the hassle now? Let's wait for central government to do it. The issue there might be that the funding goes to central government rather than to the local transport authority and would help pay for sustainable travel. I'm interested if you've got a view on how that might evolve and how it might impact on businesses and freight traffic and everything else in the Lake District.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, big question, Steve. I think, I suppose all of this comes back to the point about what's a financially sustainable model that leads you to this kind of solution, both for the individual, particularly those with, the least money, whether that's visitors or indeed local residents, or for the authorities who are constrained, and it doesn't look likely that we're going to have big new public spending settlements anytime soon, either nationally or locally. I mean, I think in terms of how you do that, I mean, I think it goes back to the point about you're going to need to provide if you're on the one hand providing sticks, which are significantly imposing charges, you need to provide alternatives, and that was again the lesson for me from Snowdonia. I mean, I think on a couple of points which do I think link the two questions together really. One is, I do think there are some causes for optimism. I think I said in my talk, I think one of the interesting things is, can you get to a model where the volume is such that actually the business case stacks up? And I do think, you know, in places like the Lake District and the Peak District and perhaps Snowdonia, there is more optimism about that happening simply because of the volume of visitors that you can provide. Now, so the question might be about pump priming then, and what that needs to get to a place where you could reach that tipping point where actually economically supports itself. And I do think, I haven't done the maths, I'm sure others will be looking at that, but I'm interested in whether that might work, and I think that's clearly underpinned some of the systems in Switzerland and elsewhere. And the second part, I suppose, is about that integrated thinking across the visitor economy and the transport system, and therefore building in from the business point of view from the outset how this might work. And there are lots of models. I mean, Snowdonia, interestingly, or Wales as a whole, is looking at a tourist tax at the moment. There's a consultation out on that right now. And that's going to be interesting, particularly because, you know, many visitor businesses are now increasingly marginal with energy costs as well. But, you know, is that another route through this? One thing I was just going to say, though, around just the interesting point about the Switzerland case study, because we're quite connected to that through the International Youth Hostel Association there as well. The apps that they have designed there are not just apps around travel, they're apps that are fully integrated with the visitor economy and experiences as well. So my colleagues in Switzerland are part of that app, and all of their information and system is connected into it. Now, that's not an easy overnight solution, but they have looked at the whole of the system, not just the transport system, but the tourism system as a whole. And I think so that is it's going to be much more difficult, I think, for us, given the diversity of that visitor economy, to get there. But that's a vision, I think, that has underpinned their success there.
Yeah, thanks very much. Now I'm going to jump to Gillian, who's leaving us in a few minutes to catch a train, I hope, rather than drive somewhere. Gillian, do you have any closing thoughts? And I'm particularly interested on the end point here. Would you allow HGVs and delivery vehicles into the Lake District to support the economy and the resident population as well as the visitors, or would you want to ban them as well? And how would you handle that?
I think, you know, the main thing to target here is the visitor economy, the visitors in terms of the travel. I think we have to allow business, we have to allow deliveries. There are, however, there's still a trajectory that should be decided upon for the phase out of fossil fuel vehicles, and for where it's possible to think about only smaller vehicles, so the transition of goods onto smaller vehicles to actually come into the park. So there is still quite a lot that can be done, but we're not talking about banning the critical, you know, in business travel and deliveries. And I don't think, you know, I think a lot of what I couldn't agree more with everything that James has just said, and a lot, just about everything that we've all said has talked about the need to really undertake some integrated modelling of what could be done, the revenue that could be raised. But I think one of the problems with doing that without some research, some other research that's required, is that if we use assumptions, the sort of tried and tested assumptions that often goes into transport modelling around what the response might be to different prices, and we just assume that people are going to respond by not coming because they'll go somewhere else, then we're going to miss the potential that Steve was talking about, that people are going to be more open to potentially to having their car use restricted or charged into the park, if there are other alternatives provided for them, because of the nature of what it is, of you know, what they can see far more urgency here and now today, and actually want to have a much more pleasant experience than they're currently getting. I really believe that the visitor experience is being ruined and people are being put off now. This is not something that's into the future.
Okay. Thank you very much, Julian, for that response, and also thank you for your presentation. I know you've got to dash, but we'll remain with the other three people.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, so I think we need to come to a close here. So in the last couple of minutes, what I was going to do is ask each of our three remaining presenters in turn if they wouldn't mind just saying what their next step would be for the Lake District. I'll start with you, James Blake, if I may.
I think it's been a really useful session. I think there are some key conclusions from it. And I do think, for me, getting into the nitty-gritty of the kind of modelling of how an integrated system might work, starting from different perspectives, whether that's a community perspective, a visitor perspective, and a business perspective. You can build the best practice in, but there are some examples out there which I think could give you the basis for doing that. And I think if you do that, it will help to provide a practical, not just a sort of theoretical evidence base for the next steps, and hopefully give people the confidence to move forward. So that, I think, would be my one key message.
Very helpful. If I might go to the other James from the Peak District.
Okay, forgive me for giving a view on the Peak District, but I would say keep the conversation going. This is a mature conversation. This is a conversation which I think is leading the thinking in the national parks. So keep the conversation going. The second point I would make is look at successes and look at incremental wins just to begin to turn the tide. And the third point I would make is let's make this a national conversation. Let's make this a national conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Stephen, 2 minutes at the most.
I'd agree with what the last James or both Jameses have said, actually, but particularly the point of a national conversation and doing incremental things, because I think one of the things that's happened, particularly in the Lake District, has been that people have seen ideas come and go, and nothing really has changed. And there was the Go Lakes thing, as I think somebody said in the chat. But I think something that actually sees some improvement would be good. I'm wondering whether there's a practical thing of, say, a car-free week in part of the park, to see what that would, with associated bus and e-bike and other provision, just to see what that would look like. As a way of just testing things out. We have car-free days. Maybe something like that would be a way to sort of kickstart this and to have a conversation.
Thank you. And I do know that Ullswater, for example, is planning a car-free day later in the year. So it would be interesting to see how that goes, and maybe elsewhere in the park and in the surrounding areas as well. So I think it remains now for me to say a very big thank you to our four speakers. Gillian's already left us. But James Beresford and James Blake, thank you, and Stephen Joseph as well. Thank you very, very much for all the effort you've put in. What I hope the last 2 hours has done for everybody on the call is provide an enormous amount of input and thought provocation, so that you can reflect on this and contribute further to the initiative being led by the National Park Partnership. And I'm sure that there'll be follow-up directly afterwards from Action for ACT in Cumbria and the National Park Partnership, to those of you that have participated. We've got some great comments and questions which we haven't had time to address in the chat. We'll try and follow those up, and we look forward to an ongoing conversation with the surveys that I described earlier on, that should really give us a perspective on where we have to get to and how we might get there. So thank you to everybody for participating. There's been really active participation. We've only lost 6 people in the whole session, which is very good. And I wish you all an enjoyable and hopefully drier day than it is outside my window at the moment in Cumbria. So thank you very much, and look forward to moving this forward. Good night. Goodbye.